Thank you, Craig. I would like to first thank you for inviting me. It's been wonderful coming here, and I really enjoyed the exhibition that I hope everybody has had a chance to see, otherwise you will have to do it. To me, as European curator, it's very interesting to see our design analyzed through the sharp glaze of Craig Miller and the American view. So congratulations, Craig, to the beautiful show. But I'm here today to talk about judging and museums. And to me, this conference with the 4 parts of the sessions, I mean, this is the designing part that we heard yesterday. That's pretty obvious. You have to have some of the great designers talking to you. The manufacturing part, the making part, of course, there won't be any design without the makers. That's also quite obvious. And today, with the society that we're living in, marketing is quite important. I mean, there's no question about the importance of marketing. So these 3 sessions of this conference, I think, were quite obvious that you would meet. But I was very happy getting invited in the session judging, because that's what I believe one very important question on creating the vision or the history of design. And so I hope this subject will interest you as much as it interests me. I guess there are many designers and visitors, producers that have been visiting museums that wonder, why are these objects actually here? And why can I see many similar objects in many different design museums? Who are these people that decides what I will be able to see? What are they thinking? How are they judging what we can see? And well, being one of these gatekeepers that I actually am, I would like to give you some advice on how to make your objects into the design collection in museums, anyway. But you first, since I am an historian, of course, the first thing I claim that you will have to do is to have historical awareness of what has happened before. You need to relate your design to the design history, and you also need to explain how it relates and why this is interesting. Yesterday, Eero Koivisto showed you a very interesting picture of the Brown design and the Macintosh iPhone design. That kind of connections, historical connection and historical awareness of what has happened before is, to me, very important. And the curators, of course, we are hard judges on this subject. We are always asking the question, well, haven't I really seen this before? And even worse, wasn't it better then? We're very, very bad people here. We try not to tell the designers, though. We talk about it ourselves behind the curtains. And what I will try to do today is give you sort of a view of the work behind that you normally don't meet. So that's a big issue, historical awareness. And the next thing you need to do, of course, is to make something that we have never seen before. You have to be innovative. And hopefully you make something that also improves the lives of people, of the users, especially in the modernistic point of view. If we talk of modernism as some kind of useful objects, mass-produced, that you could sell and buy and use, this innovative perspective where you improve people's daily life will be very, very important. But also, if we talk about the more postmodern kind of design, talking about more art design, you have to be innovative and maybe even more make something that we haven't seen before. And that is very hard, I must say. And the next thing you have to do might be even harder. I don't want to frighten you if you are designers, but you need to make all these invisible borders that we have visible by breaking them. That's the only way. And this is something that is often, why this judging session interests me very much, is because this is something that we often don't talk about, that we have borders. We have a design community, we have an art community, we have a literature community, whatever. We have communities in the society. And these are quite obvious, but very hard to define. There are very strong borders, but they're not visible, they're not showed and explained. And how you make the knowledge of these borders is by joining the design community, or whatever community you would like to join. You have to learn and how the design community thinks. And when I talk about the design community, then of course it is designers, producers, museum curators, journalists, marketing people, every kind of those people that we are here today. And exhibitions, where you see exhibitions, is it design or is it art? Is it in an art gallery or design gallery? And so on. There are these borders, and they are very hierarchical, but they're not very easy to find and see. And many of them we just take for granted. So what you need to do is sort of breaking the borders, making them visible by breaking them. But you can't break them very radical, because then we won't see you. We will, if you're very, very radical, we will define your design as not design, and don't, well, define it as part of another field and don't really care about it. And to be a little bit more specific to you, I would say that where the design community is today, with the borders that we have, for example, the design by Jersey Seymour that we saw yesterday, with the swimming pool and so on, that is sort of on, still within the design community, but on the edge of a border of design community today. Because in 5 years, in 6 years, 10 years, 20 years, this border will have changed, being even more open or getting more closer. We don't know. So if you want to be innovative, you have to sort of find out the design community's borders by taking part of it, and then try to make them visible by breaking them enough. In Sweden we call it lagom, which is not very much and not very little. It's like lukewarm beer, you know, in England and so on. It's lagom. So you have to be sort of lukewarm in breaking them. And the fourth and last thing you need to do, of course, is to market your design with an interesting story. Today we live in a society with where communication is maybe our main topic, with the internet and with the media on a whole. Marketing is very important. And how do you market something? Well, you tell an interesting story. And also when you are marketing your design to me as a curator, you need to connect it to an interesting story. And this story needs to have connections to all these other points that I've showed you, to the history, to the why it's innovative, and awareness of these borders. Because my job, if I talk about me, is as a curator in the National Museum. I will tell a little bit more about the museum later, but this is a museum which is quite traditional. I understand why Craig has invited me to join the modernist point of view, not just because Sweden is a quite strong modernistic country, but it's a traditional institution, and what I have to do is to argue very hard for some acquisitions that I want to do. I have a boss that's very traditional, and in the beginning, I've been in the National Museum 11 years now. In the beginning, I was very angry with him when he asked, well, you know, I don't like this stuff. Why do you bring it here? It's ugly and whatever. And I said, well, you're an art historian. You write about a landscape painting from the 19th century. What do you know? But after a while, instead of being angry with him, I have, you know, it's the age, you get mature and so on. I have realized that it's very good, because then I have to sharpen my argument. Why are these objects actually so good that we need to acquire them to the National Museum collection? And this is what I have to do. So if you want me to buy your design, you need to give me these arguments that I have to give to my boss, which is about, I need to explain the historical position about these objects that you have done, place them in a history. I need to explain why they're innovative. I need to explain the borders that they're breaking, that they're new in some way. And I need this interesting story to make my job possible. So we need to sort of collaborate in that. So, but if we change perspectives for a while, it all depends on what point of view you're taking. Why do we have museum collections at all? Of course, as Craig said, they are important, and maybe they have been more important in the history of creating a status and some kind of story around art and design or whatever they're including. But their purpose is hardly to promote an individual designer or a manufacturer, a producer. So what are their purpose, really? This is my museum. It's the Nationalmuseum in Stockholm, a small country in northern Europe, quite small city. And the Nationalmuseum was founded in 1792, which makes us proudly 1 year older than the Louvre in Paris. But we're not as famous as the Louvre, of course, and we don't have their collections either, unfortunately. But still, we're the oldest. Can't change that. And the museum building is from 1866, and the architect was August Stüler, a German architect that made many museums. And since the Nationalmuseum has never got a wing or something, I think, because August Stüler, the museum building, is very typical to the early museums from the middle of the 19th century in Europe. And this, that we have never really rebuilt it, makes our museum maybe, it's very typical, but maybe today it's quite unique being so typical for an 19th century museum. And what you do when you enter, you enter a great hall where you climb very heavy stairs. They're really heavy. My room is the first floor, and so I climb that stair every day, several times. Sometimes I run, and it gets me really, really tired. And it's not that many stairs, but they're designed to make you small. They're not designed functionally to be good stairs, you know, to make the climbing easy. They're designed to make you small, walk slowly, sort of, yeah, and don't run in the stairs, which I do then when the museum is closed, of course. And at the walls there are paintings which tell you about the history of Swedish art, and collectors, important members of the royal family that has built up this collection are portraited and so on. And then on the next level, on the top floor, when you enter the top floor, you are supposed to be dirty eyes, dirty modern eyes that are destroyed by the modern life in the 19th century when industrialism was starting. Your dirty modern eyes are supposed to be washed by the antique splendor of this plaster copy of the Parthenon frieze, because the antique world was the best, the most prominent one. And this is very important. The museum was built to educate the visitor's taste. And this was not just the Nationalmuseum, it was the goal for almost all the European museums from the 19th century, to educate the people's taste. And if you visited then the Applied Art and Design section, this is also the Nationalmuseum, a picture from 1900 about, you met both unique objects and mass-produced objects, but they were all selected because they had such a high quality, and they would serve as models for you as a designer or a producer. You were supposed to come then as a designer, you were supposed to study the collections and learn from history, and then hopefully your own design would improve in quality by this study. And if you were not a designer and you wanted to enter and see the collection, because this was a public museum, anyone could enter, as today. If you were not a designer or a producer, we were all consumers, right? With the industrialist society, everybody became a consumer, and there was a great angst for people buying ugly stuff, and that the world would get ugly, which maybe it did, I don't know. But this frightness was very important, an important explanation to the museums. You were supposed to come here and your taste would get educated, and then you would go out and buy more beautiful objects. Good design. And good design was the same as national design in those days, in the late 19th century. Not just in Sweden, but in many other European countries. And I think this is fascinating. The idea was that if I, as a consumer, bought beautiful Swedish design, my money, the money I spent, would sort of stay within the borders of my country. The worst thing you could do, Joseph, was to buy ugly German stuff. Actually, that was the worst thing you could do. And to make that not happen, to make the ugly German stuff coming into Sweden, this is before the Bauhaus period, of course, you would get educated in your taste and learn what was beautiful. And this is part of the modernistic movement too, because there was a goal, a belief, I would say, a belief that there was one right taste, and all the others were wrong, of course. And the right taste in Sweden was very much austere, simpleness, natural materials, functionalism, as we call the modernism, as Eero Koivisto talked about yesterday. It had to function, it had to be good. But there was also a belief that we could create this society where everybody would have the same things, which is, of course, a utopia that nobody actually wants. But the belief was very strong and not questioned at all, I would say, until the 1960s almost, that there couldn't be one taste that would fit everybody. And the argument was this national perspective, always underlining this argument why people had to be educated in what was good design and bad design was because we needed, the Swedish state needed their money to stay within the country. And I think today, with this economic crisis that we're having, we can see similar thinking. Even though we're living in a globalized world, in Sweden, we are very angry with you. Actually, you know the Saab car company? We don't think that it will exist in 1 year, and it's all your fault, actually. And it is because the GM doesn't want to spend money on Saab, the best car in the world, you know, if you ask me. But it is because the GM needs to survive, and they have to make priorities. And here, of course, you make priorities on what's best for your own country. So these national borders that have maybe not been so visible comes more visible with the economical crisis. And I don't know what will happen with this, and we can survive definitely without the Saab too. So I drive a Volvo anyway. So, yeah. But this taste education, or the education of people's taste, has been quite a strong heritage in the museum work. And since the 1960s, these ideas of creating a taste or a society where everybody would fit in, we talk about more beautiful objects for everyday use in Sweden. That was the goal. Actually, that's very Swedish. It's very boring. I could just show you my bracelet, which I like, but it's a bracelet by Pia Wallén. It's very simple, and it's supposed to be this functionalist. You can wear it to work, you can wear it on a nice party, you can wear it anytime. It's like there's nothing really changing. It's good for every time, every every situation in life, which makes Swedish life a little bit like nothing really is very funny or very boring. It's like it's a straight line. It doesn't have these differences. And of course, that goes very closely to the Swedish mentality, this more beautiful objects for everyday use, that everything also should be useful. But with the taste debate in the 1960s, one started to criticize this idea. Why should some people take the privilege of telling other people what is right or wrong? Doesn't everybody have the right to their own taste and do what they want? And this debate started a huge change in the concept of judging design, because nowadays we never talk about taste education. Of course, we educate. The museum purpose is to educate people that come there wants to learn something, but we don't tell you this is wrong and this is right, this is what you ought to buy, and don't care about that things. Today we talk much more of quality, which of course is a concept that could be interpreted in very many ways, but we now talk about that we are acquiring objects with high quality instead of good taste. This has been very important. And of course, education, as I said, is important for the museum purpose. Curators, all curators, our mission is to meet everybody that enters the museum and give you something that you can bring home. Something that is an experience that will develop your own mental way of thinking. I mean, that you will get thoughts that you didn't have before. We want to change. We will open your eyes. We want to change your lives. And I think that we seldom succeed, but hopefully we do small steps one at a time when you come and visit exhibitions. But if you ask the question again, what are museums really for? Today I would say that there are places for contemplation, places that you can enter and disappear for a while from the hectic life in the city, and you can find some peace and some rest, and you have a good experience with your friends if you go there, and preferably you have a cup of coffee that will taste good too. I mean, that's the most important thing. If you don't have a good cafe, nobody will come, actually. And I think it's important that we are aware of that. We that do make exhibitions, we that work in the museums, you need the whole experience for people to come. They don't come to get educated on what design they will have to do if you're a designer, what objects they should buy. They come to, or you come to have a good and interesting experience. So I would say too that in this making this experience, objects have moved a little bit from being educative to become treasures in some way. And this treasure, you could compare, at least in the Swedish country where we're very secularized, very few people go to church. The museum objects have almost gained that treasure status, that there are something that you could come and almost worship. I mean, not worship in a religious way, but you come and, oh wow, this is the thing, here it is. Even if it's design or if it's art or whatever, this is the real stuff. And that is, of course, what museums are about. We have the originals, while you can meet, I mean, today you can find any of the objects in the exhibition on the internet. You can see pictures of them, you can read books on them, you can read articles, magazines and so on. You can go to lectures, you can see pictures of them here too. But I hope really that when you enter the exhibition that you feel that it's something different to meet the three-dimensional real object that gives you another experience. And that is what we are for. Our purpose is, of course, to give you interesting experiences, but also to keep and preserve these objects for coming generations. And in this treasure kind of change that has happened to me, that's in the museum field, it goes along, of course, with the design history. The design history of the 20th century have been very much built up around some events, some designers, and some objects. For example, this is Le Corbusier's pavilion L'Esprit Nouveau that he displayed in Paris in 1925, and that has been stated to be one of the first modernistic interiors and very influential. And this is another picture from, not as famous, from the same building. And if you look carefully, now let's see if I can manage this. This, you see this cupboard? That's proudly an object in our collection. And this cupboard, that is actually the same that was in Paris 1925, might, I would say sometimes, when it's displayed in the National Museum, not everybody goes, oh, wow, this is Le Corbusier's cupboard, because it's not that obvious, it's quite simple, but this cupboard, when you know the story, becomes sort of a treasure, really, that, wow, this is the one, it was there. I couldn't go there because I wasn't born, but I can meet this cupboard. So it's one of the real treasures in our collection from the 19th century, 20th century design. But then, who writes the design history? Who decides that L'Esprit Nouveau was that important? I mean, I wouldn't argue that it wasn't, but still. Somebody takes these decisions. Somebody is the judge and decides what is worth preserving, what is worth reading about. And what I would like to state is that be aware. I mean, think about this. There is someone, history doesn't write itself. One says that always about wars, you know, that like the Palestinian conflict, both sides, this Christmas, both sides claimed to be winners. It depends on who tells the story. Storytelling and history writing is the same thing. So the history of design doesn't write itself. There are always people behind. And as a curator, I would state that, or claim that we do history writing, of course. Objects that we select to the collection, we select some objects, and in the same moment we don't select other objects. We write books on some objects and we write no books on other objects, and so we sort of create the history, and we also mirror, of course, the development in the society, if we're talking about contemporary design especially. Of course, if I go back to my boss that I had to argue with for these acquisitions, and then I got through with this acquisition, I will, of course, be part of the history writing of this piece. I will display it in exhibitions, I will do articles on it, I will, if somebody asks me what is important of today, I will choose this designer or this object, whatever, and I will claim the status of this. Not, maybe you could look upon me as a revenge against my boss doing this, but I would say that it's more about that I really believe, I am convinced that this is an important object, of course, because I had to argue for it. But if you look at, if you leave me and you stand a little bit beside, if I succeed in making this object that I was criticized for purchasing, if I succeed making this object important, it will also make me important. I will become a curator that was progressive, that made the right acquisitions for the collections and so on. So we are sort of part of creating the history of ourselves. And I don't know how to get rid of this. I don't get out of it. I don't see that there is a possibility for a change. I mean, somebody has to have my job. If I don't have it, someone else has it. But I think it's very important that we are aware of these facts and these, that we're part of a puzzle creating history. So there's always someone writing history. And how often do you think about what the world will be like in 100 years? Maybe with the climate change, we think a little bit, but to me, it's there every day, every minute. This is my job, actually. In a way, I work for you, for people that live today in creating exhibitions and writing articles and so on. But in acquiring objects for the museum, my perspective is always 100 years. What does people want to see in 100 years from our time? And of course, my guess is as good as yours. really? I don't know. I don't know anybody in 100 years, but I was thinking, like, nobody of us will be here in 100 years. And since I am an historian, in the bottom, I believe that I think like a historian, and I try to think about a historian in 100 years. What would they believe was interesting? What was new in our time? What was radical? What was groundbreaking? And I always think that if I acquire 20 objects today that I think are good, of course I don't acquire anything I don't believe in, but still, I buy 20 things. In 10 years, 2 of these things will be very interesting, and the other 18 is like, well, and 5 of them are maybe, ooh. But in 50 years, there will be 2 other of these 20 that will be interesting, and you don't know which one of them. So what I try to do, of course, is to go back and really have these, that they're innovative, that they have a position in history, and so on, these things that I've talked about in the beginning. But you don't really know. But the perspective in 100 years is very important. And as a curator, of course, the goal is to acquire objects like the cupboard of Le Corbusier from 1925, and to acquire it the minute it was there, to be able to see that, oh wow, this is this important. But again, we take part in creating the importance of these events and objects. And the museum goal, of course, is no longer to educate people, but to show you the 3-dimensional originals. That's very important for us, and to preserve them. I always look at the collection like as an archaeological grave, if you compare to, I don't know, the pyramids or something, an archaeological place, where you in the future will be able to come and find and dig out the originals of our time, not just see pictures and so on and everything is gone. That has happened, of course, a lot with lots of objects, but the museums will preserve them. That is our goal. And finally, we curators, Craig, Joseph, we are very aware that we will be judged ourselves. So I might be hard on what we acquire, but I know too, history will be hard on me if I made the right decisions or the wrong decisions. So it's not that easy a job. Well, I hope that you got some idea about what's happening behind the curtains in museums, and I thank you very much for listening.